Support for this program provided by National Electrical Contractors Association and Electrical Workers, IBEW, Local 58.
Thank you for joining us today to talk about the future of work. Before we get into the conversation, I'd like to say that all of us at Detroit Public Television, along with the entire nation, are heartbroken by the mass shooting at Michigan State University that claimed the lives of 3 and left 5 others critically wounded. Our hearts go out to the families, MSU community, and all those impacted by this senseless tragedy. To help our community grapple with the grief and disbelief, we've compiled a list of resources to support and help that can be found at onedetroitpbs.org. Moving now to the future of work. Today, we're talking about Generation X, born from 1965 to 1980. This cohort is sandwiched between the baby boomers and millennials. The latchkey generation claims the highest incomes but holds the most debt. In the workforce, they're moving into leadership roles as boomers make their exit, so now the ball is in Gen X's court. As they enter midlife and mid-career, they're also raising teenagers and caring for aging parents. They'll have the power to make changes as we head towards new business landscapes, technological advances, and whatever else the future holds. The question, are Michigan's Gen Xers ready for the next 5 to 10 years? Well, to help us unpack some of this, I'm joined by Michigan Works Association CEO Ryan Hundt. Ryan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Will. Great to be here today. I'm looking forward to our conversation on the future of work and Generation X and the impact that they have and will continue to have on the workforce for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And also for anyone who's watching, feel free to add your questions, your comments to the chat. We have producers who will be feeding those to us later on, so join the conversation. Ryan, let's just jump right in. Let's set the table. What is the workforce landscape right now for someone who's a Gen Xer? You know, are they what level of job are they holding? What's the next step for them in the workforce? Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So, Will, I thought you set the table very well at the beginning of this conversation, talking about some of the dynamics that are facing Gen Xers, some of the positions they hold in both their personal and professional lives, some of those areas in which they may continue to struggle, but also seek out new opportunities. First and foremost, I'd like to talk about some trends that we're seeing right now in the workforce. Just a few years ago, millennials surpassed Gen Xers as the largest generation in workforce in terms of just the sheer volume of workers that are currently engaged in the workforce in 2023. And with baby boomers either having retired or staring down retirement themselves, there's plenty of older Gen Xers who are also kind of following suit with those baby boomers. Maybe they're preparing for retirement themselves. We know that for the most part, Gen Xers will be in the workforce again for the next 10 to 30 years. So we need to make sure that they are continuing to have a significant impact in the workforce. Of course, they certainly are. Even with the smaller number of workers compared to millennials currently in the workforce, Gen Xers are now also entering their prime income ages. We know that typically the age 45 to 54 in the United States is typically the age demographic that sees the largest growth in terms of potential earnings over the course of that time period. So many are either entering or have entered that prime income age as we speak. In addition to entering their prime income age, they're also making up the majority of leadership positions across the workforce. That's not just here in Michigan or in the United States, but globally, Gen Xers make up about 51% of leaders in organizations with an average of about 20 years of work experience. So they've certainly followed that natural progression of going from entry-level positions all the way up through, middle management, now into upper-level management and leadership positions in both the public and private sector.
Right. And that level of experience that they have, because that's a lot of time for a generation to have left or not left, I guess, because maybe the next 10 years or maybe the next 30 years. There's a lot of value there, especially because there are few of them than the boomers or millennials. So that leads to my next question: how valuable are Gen Xers with that breadth of experience in the workforce already going to be for any kind of organization or company going into the future? Because they're taking up the mantle for boomers, but they just have so much more experience than a lot of millennials do.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. The value that Gen Xers have in today's workforce certainly should not be discounted. We already talked about how they're growing into leadership positions. They're entering that prime age of income earnings over the next decade or so. But really, they are kind of that forgotten middle child between the baby boomer generation and the millennials. That's just not my take. It's not me speaking, on my own personal opinions, but I'd let the data speak for itself. Over the last several years, we've seen Gen Xers with an average promotion of only 1.2 promotions over a 5-year period. That's lower than both millennials and baby boomers. Despite that fact, those that are in leadership positions typically have a larger team. So what we're seeing is, from a direct reports standpoint, Gen Xers in leadership positions have an average of 7 direct reports, while if you look at millennial leaders, they only have about an average of 5 direct reports in their organizations. And so we see some of these dynamics playing out right now in real time. I did see a quote in a LinkedIn article not too long ago that said, "Never underestimate the generation who survived the life and death of MTV." And so Gen Xers, they're that forgotten middle child in many aspects. The contributions that they're making to the workplace right now are certainly considerable. In all seriousness, they are perhaps the most adaptable generation in American history. They had to adapt to rapidly changing workplace and social conditions from the last several decades. Many Gen Xers, if you think about the financial industry, for example, if you were a Gen Xer born in the late 60s, early 70s, by the time you got to the mid 80s or the late 80s and you started your first job in the financial sector, you were probably still using paperwork in a lot of your everyday activities, filling out papers for applications and loans and things of that sort. And that was really before technology took over. And fast forward to 2023, we're using technology and computers and apps for pretty much every single financial transaction that is common to the average American. Gen Xers had a front seat to that entire evolution of technology from the mid to late 1980s through today. And so their adaptability should not be overlooked. We also shouldn't overlook the fact that adaptability has led to their entrepreneurial spirit. 55% of startups in America have been founded by Gen Xers. And lastly, college has been more of a necessity rather than in previous generations. Baby boomers, for example, probably saw college education, post-secondary education as a luxury and not necessarily a necessity. But it has been an expectation, I would say, of Gen Xers beginning with their generation that post-secondary education would lead to better income, an individual able to better provide for their family because of being better educated. So 35% of Gen Xers currently hold a bachelor's degree. That's a significant portion compared to previous generations that grew up thinking with the mindset of, hey, college education is more of a luxury than something that we would need to advance ourselves in our career pursuits.
Yeah, it's one thing to think about, because a lot of the social media platforms and the websites and kind of the way e-commerce and all of that kind of stuff is set up is due to Gen Xers taking up the mantle of, let's go into what the internet is. Let's really see what it's about. So it's kind of about time to acknowledge that, because as they're going to be taking over these leadership roles, we should know that they're prepared, that they've always been there to a certain degree. So how might, as they're moving into these leadership roles with all of this experience, how is that going to change in the workplace for, the generations coming up, millennials, Gen Z? How is the Gen X leadership style going to be a little bit different from previous generations?
Sure. So I talked a little about the adaptability of Gen Xers and just in the way in which they've had to experience the world in both the workplace and in social environments over the last several decades. I do think that Gen Xers are very well equipped to provide mentorship opportunities for both millennials and Gen Zers that are entering the workplace as we speak. I think mentoring comes naturally to Gen Xers in their leadership positions. Data has shown that they see organizations as a way for cultivating a better employee-friendly relationship. We also saw, because if you think about baby boomers, for example, the one characteristic that comes to mind oftentimes is work ethic. And that's not to say that Gen Xers, millennials, or Gen Zers don't have a strong work ethic, but I do think that beginning with Gen Xers, they were the first generation that really valued that work-life balance. They want to go to their kids' t-ball games. They want to be active in their community outside of the confines of a 9-to-5 job. Again, that began really with the Generation X. So adaptability, work-life balance, those are all leadership traits that I think Generation X certainly values and promotes in the workplace. And as they're moving into leadership positions, that's going to be key. And it's really a reason why I think millennials and Gen Zers oftentimes place significant importance on work-life balance, perhaps on par with, in some cases, even above wages and compensation packages and things of that sort. Lastly, I would also say that collaboration with Gen X leadership styles, that's key as well. I think that's driven primarily by higher levels of education and also being oriented in team sports and team activities during their childhood years. So that adaptability, collaboration, and work-life balance, those are all key traits that we see in leadership styles for Gen Xers. And you're also seeing that transition over into leadership styles for millennials. And I'm sure that will be the case also as Gen Z begins taking more and more leadership positions in the years to come.
Right. So as we're talking about this, there's going to be leadership, but one of the biggest issues that we're facing is just it's a numbers game. So are we going to have deficits in leadership throughout organizations? And is that something that we should be planning for? Should millennials, younger, older Gen Z be being trained to take on leadership positions maybe sooner than they would anticipate because there are, as we were saying, just less of the Generation X cohort?
Sure. Yeah, you said it perfectly, Will. It's a numbers game, right? We have more baby boomers that are retiring. Some of the older individuals of Generation X are looking at and preparing for retirement, perhaps even within the next decade. So there are going to be considerable gaps in leadership. I also think that because the baby boomers were such a significant population of the workforce for many years, that in some ways may have even prevented Gen X from stepping into leadership roles a little earlier in their career. But we are seeing those leadership roles being communicated and given to millennials and Gen Z coming along the way as well, because there are some significant gaps that are going to need to be filled from a leadership standpoint. I do think that the future generations for millennials and Gen Z are also ready to step into those leadership positions. And that's really thanks in huge part to the contributions of Gen Xers in the workforce. We've talked about adaptability and collaboration, work-life balance, being technologically savvy. If I said those things, you might think, oh, you must be talking about millennials or Gen Z, but let's not forget all those contributions from Gen Xers as well. Those are all defining characteristics of that generation that have been passed down to as the new standard, really, on how to run an organization, how to lead a collaborative team, and how to achieve success, not only in our professional lives, but also in our personal lives. So I would say millennials and Gen Zers are ready for leadership because of Gen X.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put that too, because a lot of times, as a millennial myself, like my older brother is a Gen Xer. The people who have been kind of showing us how to do things, how to pave the way, have been Gen X. So as baby boomers pass the torch, they'll also be passing on the responsibility to fix a struggling K-12 system, close talent gaps, repair infrastructure woes in an effort to tackle a major issue that we're contending with, which is a dwindling population. And I got a firsthand account of how this is impacting Michigan businesses from the co-founder of a leather goods company called Pingree Detroit. Their co-founder, Jeff Slash. So take a look at this and we'll get your response on the other side.
Pingree Detroit, we are an 8-year-old worker-owned design and manufacturing cooperative. We just celebrated our 8th birthday on January 15th, actually, which is exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so we take materials, so everything from leather to seatbelts, airbags, otherwise destined for the landfill. We keep those out of the landfill from the big three, and we turn those into everything from the first shoes made in Detroit in the 50s to backpacks, purses, wallets, dog leashes, coasters, everything in between.
So what is one thing that could be better about doing business in Southeast Michigan?
One of the challenges of doing business in Michigan and Detroit is there's sometimes not the critical mass of people in certain areas to where if we did a pop-up, downtown right now, for instance, we might need to have 1,000 conversations over a course of a week to do really well. Well, we might only get a couple hundred. How many folks are actually going to come into our store? So like for us, being in front of enough people with enough consistency for us to be able to accomplish our goals to stay open as a business is really important. And we have consistently had a hard time of just getting in front of enough folks. We've had to get really creative and everything from online advertising to more, unique activations. So for us, one of the hardest things has just been getting enough support from enough folks consistently and without a bunch of marketing budget to support, paid advertising. We've had to get creative on how can we just remind folks that, hey, we have these new things and we're coming out this, then do you have a dog? And,
Right.
it's been really just very challenging for us.
For those of you just joining us, I'm here with Michigan Works Association CEO Ryan Hundt. We're talking about some of the obstacles Generation X will have to navigate as baby boomers retire and they take the top spots in organizations and institutions across Michigan. Also, don't forget to put your questions in the chat if you have any, if you want to be a part of the conversation. So, Ryan, Jeff was just talking about the fact that there aren't a critical mass of people. And kind of across the board, that is a concern because as a state, Michigan is losing population. Sometimes we're just staying right where we are, but for the most part, we're not growing in the way that we need to be. And for people like Jeff and Pingree, they need people to come here. And for people to come here, they need jobs and disposable income. So from your perspective, from what you're seeing, what is your response to that? But also, what does Michigan need to be doing to make, jobs themselves, the work itself, more attractive to get people to come here?
Sure. First and foremost, congratulations and happy 8th birthday to Jeff and Pingree Detroit. What an awesome success story they are. Small businesses continue to be the backbone of our economy, not just nationally, but in our hometowns and our communities right here in Michigan. So congratulations again to Jeff and his team at Pingree. I think he spoke volumes to some of the headwinds that Michigan is facing, generally speaking. Will, you mentioned a declining population. Again, that's not just a Michigan issue, but we certainly feel it more so here over the past couple of decades than perhaps other parts of the country that are also declining in population, but certainly there are areas that are growing in population. So that's a pretty significant headwind, not just from a gathering new customer standpoint, but for businesses that are hiring and making decisions on how are they going to strategize and plan for the future of talent and workforce here in Michigan. Oftentimes, the first question that the state of Michigan receives when they're entertaining a new client and looking at potential investment opportunities in Michigan. One is, where am I going to build my new factory, plant, R&D site, whatever that may be. So site selection is key. And then the second piece is always around talent and workforce. Where are they going to get the people to come to work, knowing that Michigan has, that last couple of decades declined in population. Mm-hmm. We lose congressional seats, it seems like, every census. So not only is our growth declining in Michigan from a population standpoint, but also perhaps our political influence in DC, in the nation's capital, also declining as a direct result of that population decrease. Some things that Michigan can do, and I think Michigan does do quite well, and we just really need to double down on those efforts, is accentuating those positive attributes of our state. Many people may not know if they live outside of the Midwest, but Michigan has the largest shoreline of fresh water in the country, and we certainly look at our wonderful assets, and our natural beauty is on par with other parts of the state or other parts of the country and other parts of the globe, quite frankly. So for folks that are looking for that live, work, play aspect where you're never too far away from some of those outdoor amenities, but we also have a number of cultural assets that we continue to highlight, institutions of higher learning for folks like myself who are big sports fans, big professional sports teams like the Red Wings and the Tigers, the Lions and the Pistons. Those are all key attributes that we just need to continue highlighting to folks that live outside of Michigan, not just to come here to tour the state, but hopefully come here and relocate to the state so that we can continue to grow in population in the coming years. I know there's also been some talk about Michigan perhaps in the future as a result of climate change being sort of a climate haven for other parts of the country that people may be moving away from due to some of those challenges and issues. And so Michigan could potentially reap the benefits of being a climate haven in the next few decades. But in the near term, we do need to continue highlighting those positive attributes of Michigan to encourage people to move here, not just for the job, but really for the experience of building a profession, growing a family, and also being a wonderful partner right there in many communities across the state.
Right. You know, with all the conversations that we've had for the future of work, be it about, design or what the jobs of the future are going to be, one of the things that constantly comes up every time is, are we marketing ourselves well? Do we have the voice? Do we have the ambassadors around the country, around the globe to really let people know what's going on here in Michigan? And I think even here today, we're talking about Gen X and what their path is, but it comes up time and time again. So I think if you're a Gen Xer watching and you have some decisions to make, you're in a senior leadership position, maybe add a little bit to the marketing budget. Maybe reach out to some partners across state lines to let them know what's going on here. So another thing I wanted to get from you, Ryan, was what about jobs specifically? Is there something that firms here in Michigan can be doing to make the positions that they have open more alluring than, say, somewhere like Mississippi or a southern state or Texas where a lot of people are flocking to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what we've seen that has been working the past few years, it's not just about wages and compensation, but we talk a lot about that work-life balance. In Michigan, we feel very strongly that the work-life balance and the cultural and natural assets that we have are very much competitive with other parts of the country and other parts of the globe. You mentioned it will not only increasing perhaps maybe the marketing budget to lure folks to Michigan and to companies, but also partnering with local convention visitors bureaus, partnering with the Pure Michigan campaign, partnering with their local Michigan Works agency to really focus on ways in which we can continue to support workers in their journey, not just from a professional standpoint, but oftentimes when we have people move into a new community, they're not just moving there for a job. They want to know, where can I go to become more involved in my community? Are there organizations they can join that are going to advance their personal and professional interests? Are there activities that they can get involved with their family or with other members of the community? And so the more that we promote ourselves, I think generally speaking, if you meet somebody from the South, they'll tell you they're from the South. If you meet somebody from the West Coast, they'll tell you they're from the West Coast. We have kind of a humble nature amongst ourselves, being from the Midwest, and that we don't
very Midwest
promote ourselves.
Yeah.
But if nobody's going to nobody's going to beat the drum for us. We have to sometimes beat our own drum. And I know that seems very simplistic and like, if we could only do that, we could solve all of our problems. I'm not going so far to say that, but I do think there is space for us to promote ourselves a little bit more. And oftentimes that does take the form of additional partnerships in the public and private sector to make sure that we're doing all that we can. We can't control things like the weather, but we can certainly control things like marketing and advertising and really fostering those partnerships and relationships.
Yeah. And, people always bring up the weather, and I just have to point out, people pay a lot of money to go where there's snow so they can ski and snowboard and enjoy those outdoor activities. We have it here. It's just built in. At certain points in the year, you can just open the door and get all of that for free. So on that, say we have the perfect marketing campaign. Pure Michigan is a global phenomenon. We still alive?
I'm still here.
Okay, there you are. I guess we're back. So because we're talking about getting people to the state, the question is, if we do have, a perfect marketing campaign, Pure Michigan is a global phenomenon, it goes viral, all the right things happen for us in the right ways. Are we ready as a state infrastructurally to handle an influx in population and people like that? Do we have the jobs? Do we have the amenities? Do we have the things that we need to get what we're asking for?
We certainly have the jobs. I don't think that's the issue here. We have an average of about 500,000 job openings in Michigan, and similar to many other parts of the country, there is way more job openings compared to the number of individuals searching for jobs. So the jobs are certainly here. We would certainly encourage anybody that is interested in looking for their next professional journey to take a look at Michigan. We have a range of occupations and industries that are hiring, from advanced manufacturing to IT to healthcare. The jobs are certainly there. I think the infrastructure largely is there, and we are seeing some significant investments that have been outlined, perhaps, for example, in the governor's executive budget recommendations that were released a couple of weeks ago, earlier this month, on advancing some objectives and investments into affordable housing, because that is always a concern, not just in Michigan, but across the country. If we have workers come in, we need to make sure that they have places where they can live that are affordable, that are not outside of their reach for the salaries or wages that they are currently receiving. So that's all very positive news from an infrastructure standpoint. And of course, as I mentioned here before on this chat today, the cultural amenities, the natural assets are certainly all there as well. I think Michigan is primed for a very significant comeback in terms of population increases over the next few decades. I'm super bullish on our prospects as a state to reap the benefits of relocations from individuals that might be seeking a new opportunity in a climate like Michigan's that is very favorable toward that growth.
Yeah, I have to say I wholeheartedly agree with that. I do. I'm feeling very optimistic about the things that are in development here. The way there's just a different feel and a different energy, and I think more relationships and more collaboration. You're starting to see some of the fruits of all the work that's going on. But unfortunately, that's where we have to end things today. I'd like to thank Michigan Works Association CEO Ryan Hundt for joining us today. Thank you, Ryan. If you want to know more about the future of work in Michigan, join the conversation at onedetroitpbs.org/future of work, and tune in next month, where we'll be talking about how we get millennials, Gen Z, all those people we're talking about to come here to Michigan. So until then, I'm Will Glover, and I'll see you in the future.
Support for this program provided by National Electrical Contractors Association and Electrical Workers, IBEW, Local 58.